And we're live. Andreas, thank you very much for taking a part out of your busy day, I assume, to be a part of our podcast, and yet again to be sort of like back to the Balkan Peninsula in a way.
Vecha, welcome. Vecha, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate being on the show, and thank you for taking your time. I really love your background. A lot of the podcasts I'm on are very monochromatic, and as you can see, I have a very dull gray background, but you're full of color. It's really nice.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's actually just so people can actually see the full view of it. It's like a mix of Cyrillic and Latin alphabet. It's something that one of my friends who I used to train with actually made. And because in Bosnia we have both the Latin and the Cyrillic alphabet, it was a really, really fun way to incorporate both cultures and letters into it.
That's very nice.
Thanks. So going from Bosnia towards through Yugoslavia and the Balkan in and of itself, and then the world, I have a feeling, and I don't think it's just a feeling, I have a sense that, the world of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is a really new thing, even though it's not a new thing in reality, but it is a really new thing for a lot of people. And it's sort of getting more of a popularity in the pop culture in one way or another, but people still have these reservations towards it. And I believe that these reservations basically stem from not understanding, not just the Bitcoin, not just the cryptocurrency, but the way the currencies work, that money works in general, the way it moves from financial institutions to government and so on and so forth. But if you had to describe Bitcoin in a way that people would actually comprehend that it's not just about a literal coin, a literal money, but about a software system in of itself, how would you actually describe it?
Well, Bitcoin relates to traditional money the same way the web relates to a newspaper. And the thing about the web is that it doesn't belong to any specific company. Some companies have websites, but the web itself is an open system of communication based on international standards that works over a network protocol. And so Bitcoin is the equivalent for money. It's an open system of communication. It doesn't belong to any one company or country. And anyone can participate in Bitcoin just like anyone can participate on the web and make a website. People can participate in Bitcoin by making a wallet and using that to communicate over the Bitcoin system with other people who have Bitcoin wallets and basically exchange money worldwide. It's funny how you say that in the Balkans, it's not part of popular culture. Every now and then I get a call from my dad in Greece, and he says, "Oh, Andreas, they were talking on TV about Bitcoin, or they mentioned your name on TV or something like that, and they got it all wrong again." Even my dad, who knows very little about Bitcoin, knows enough to know that they're getting it wrong. And it's always amusing to hear. It's really funny because you would expect in countries where the governments are often not very competent and quite dysfunctional, the people would have more confidence in private solutions, in entrepreneurial solutions, in individuals than they do. And yet, it's really strange. I find that in Greece too. People don't trust the government to do anything right, and they consider the government both incompetent and corrupt. But then if you tell them, hey, how about we use money that's made by the private sector? They're like, oh, no, you can't do that. Money has to be by the government. You're like, why? Why? Because if we don't have taxes, who's going to build the roads? Have you seen the roads in the Balkans? Because I've seen them, and they do have taxes. And if it wasn't for the European Union paying for them, I guarantee you we had terrible roads. It's a really funny cultural thing. I don't understand it at all.
But I mean, it yet again, as you so politely actually emphasized, it stems from people not really taking, not precaution, but taking the initiative to take things into their own hands, so to speak. But yet again, that's combined with like the lack of knowledge, because like they're thinking, okay, so this is just something that, you know, you can, not you, but I can read, and the people living like in the ex-Yugoslavia, perhaps wider, perhaps there's the same thing in the Greece. You know, you have certain like websites, like news websites, and then you have the comment section, and then you can see people's opinions about the thing in question. And like, you know, in terms of like the rise of the Bitcoin recently, you can see people commenting things that it's not just that they don't make sense, it's like they don't make sense. And you can see that people are still thinking of the convertible mark is tied to euro, right? So like, that's a whole different story from what I'm trying to say here. But like, I've read comments of people like mentioning gold and currency without understanding that really like gold. I know that in the US, the gold hasn't been like tied, like the US dollar hasn't been tied to gold since like 1971 or 1972, I believe. And it's like people are still making these, people are still making these connections without understanding how the money works, and yet they are making some sort of predictions about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Could you explain like to us, to like these people, what is like Bitcoin? And this might be actually the most useful question of our conversation. What is the Bitcoin's value tied to?
You know, it's funny you should say that, because I get that a lot. I'll be talking to people about Bitcoin for the first time, and they'll say, I don't understand why Bitcoin would have value. And I often ask, well, why does the euro have value? Why does the US dollar have value? And they smile immediately, because they know the answer to this one. This one's easy. They know the answer. It's because of the gold. I'm like, what gold? The gold that is in the vaults. That's why it has value. Big smile. Completely wrong. And I call that the Santa Claus theory of money, which is that if you ask an 8-year-old, why are there presents on Christmas morning? They know the answer. It's Santa Claus brought them, right? And what it is, it's a convenient, happy story that makes the world easy to understand. It's a very simple story. There are good kids, there are bad kids. Santa Claus brings the gifts, fantastic. But it's the kind of story that if you start asking questions, it falls apart really, really quickly. You have to preserve it with a lot of, you know, complicated gymnastics, because otherwise it falls apart. You know, how can Santa make all of these toys and deliver them so fast? Why do the rich kids get nicer toys than the poor kids? But the Santa Claus theory of money is where adults have an understanding of money that is a complete myth, that is based on a story that is not true, that they shouldn't believe past the age of 8, but for some reason they believe. So here's how we start. There is no gold. It's as simple as that. And all modern currencies have their value based on 2 fundamental factors. The one is utility. So the euro has value because of the economy of the whole of Europe and the economic activity of all of the participants in the euro system that give it value by ensuring that if you have a euro, you have a good expectation that tomorrow someone will accept that euro in exchange for an amount of product or service that you can intuitively understand. 1 euro will buy you, I don't know, 3 eggs or whatever. And people have the expectation that if today I go and get 3 eggs for my euro, tomorrow I will probably be able to get 3 eggs for my euro. That expectation creates value for money. The money itself has no value at all. The value isn't in the money. It's for the same reason why 1 meter is something that we can all agree is about this long. And we can all agree on that because everybody knows 1 meter is this long. And if we all had different ideas of how long a meter would be, then it wouldn't work. Money is the same in many ways. So the answer to why Bitcoin has value is exactly the same answer. The difference is who is the economy, who makes the economy that makes Bitcoin work. So Bitcoin has value because people anticipate that they will be able to use Bitcoin as a mechanism to either store value or purchase goods and services in the future. They expect, and that's created by other people also believing that, and fewer people, very few people today, using Bitcoin to buy and sell products and services, right? So if today you can buy something with Bitcoin, and you expect that tomorrow you can also buy something with Bitcoin, that means you trust it has value. Now that part of value we call utility, meaning that it's useful. It's useful for something. And Bitcoin has utility in different ways than the euro. It doesn't have as big an economy, and you can't buy as many goods and services, but it also has some other special characteristics that make it useful in the future that the euro does not. For example, no one can confiscate my Bitcoin. I can transmit my Bitcoin in a matter of seconds anywhere on the planet. Another person can receive that and verify that it is real and not forged very, very easily. These are all useful properties that make it a good kind of money. The other reason that most people do not understand about money is that money has value as long as you can't make infinite amounts of it. If you make infinite amounts of it, then money quickly loses value. And the reason is because money, just like the meter for measuring height, is in order to decide how tall you are, Fedja, what you do is you take your height and you divide it by meters and you come up with an answer. Well, if you want to see the economy of the euro or the economy of Bitcoin, what you do is you take the entire economic activity and you divide it by all of the euros that are available. And that tells you how much of that piece, how big the piece of the economy 1 euro represents. Now, what happens if you divide something by infinity? If you divide something by infinity, the answer is 0, right?
Yes.
So if you take an economy of 150 trillion euro and you divide it by 150 trillion euro, then it's worth that much. But if you double the amount of euro that exists, but the economy stays the same size, every euro now is only able to buy you half as much of what it was able to buy before because you've produced too much euro for a smaller economy. And so if you keep producing more and more euro, the economy doesn't change size. It's a bit like taking a pizza and saying, I'm really hungry today, and my friends are really hungry. So we took a pizza, and instead of cutting it into 8 slices, we're going to cut it into 16 slices. And all of your friends are like, hang on, Fedja, I don't think you understand how pizza works.
Yes.
Because when I'm hungry, what I want is 2 pizzas. I don't want you to take the same pizza and cut it into 16 slices. That's just going to make every slice smaller, right? The thing is, the economy works the same way. So one of the reasons Bitcoin is useful is because it cannot be created to infinity. In fact, it is even much more limited. There are only 6 Bitcoin, 6.25 Bitcoin being created every 10 minutes. And that means that all of the people who want to acquire Bitcoin, all of the economy of Bitcoin has to be divided by the number of Bitcoin that are available at any moment in time. If if you think of Bitcoin as the number of slices you cut your pizza, if instead of 8, today you only have 4 slices, well, those are going to be bigger slices. And so that's the other aspect of money that's really important to understand, which is that if you can create an infinite amount of money, then it loses value. But if you can create only a limited amount of money, then that money has more value. And so that's basically what Bitcoin is. It's a way for measuring value and communicating it between individuals using entirely internet technologies that is not controlled by any government or company, and that is open to every person on the planet who can simply run some software on their smartphone or on their laptop or wherever. You don't need permission to participate. And in fact, no one can stop you from participating. That's a very powerful political movement. Because it gives everyone the opportunity to be part of the system.
Yeah, it gives everybody an opportunity to be like a part of the system. But the thing like that comes to my mind, like immediately stems from 2 points that you mentioned is like, firstly or secondly, like in order that you've been talking about it, is that, okay, so it's basically a really decentralized system. Basically anybody who has the for lack of better terms, a laptop and an appropriate software and such, can participate in Bitcoin acquisition and exchange. But secondly, you also mentioned like that there, like in order for money and currency actually, but money in global to work, there has to be like a limited amount of money. That is, it cannot be like, in layman's terms, printed, or the inflation would happen, and so on and so forth. But if Bitcoin is an open, decentralized system, if it doesn't depend on the financial institutions, which I assume is like, not as I assume, but as you said, is like perhaps the biggest value of Bitcoin, and like for people and population in general, who dictates how much Bitcoin will be produced? Like if the financial institutions aren't regulating it, and if it's a decentralized system, you know, how I've read somewhere that there are like 21 million Bitcoins in total. There cannot be more. I might be wrong about this.
Yes. So the way this works is the Bitcoin system runs by a system of mathematical rules. And these mathematical rules are in every piece of software. There's a copy of these rules in every piece of software that everybody runs, right? And everybody checks that every part of the Bitcoin system behaves by these rules, meaning that every 10 minutes, a new block of transactions is added to the Bitcoin system. And this block of transaction contains all of the transactions between people that have happened over the past 10 minutes. And it also creates a new amount of Bitcoin that is introduced into the system. Now, that amount of Bitcoin goes down every 4 years. So when the Bitcoin system started, there were 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Then after 4 years, there were 25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Then after 4 years, there were 12.5 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And then this year, in 2020, it went down to 6.25. And if you think of that, every 4 years going down, 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 eventually you get down to 0, right? And at that point, it stops. So how do we know there will only be 21 million? It's not because you're simply at one day going to say, okay, stop. Because the problem with a rule like that is that it's very easy on that day to say, don't stop,
of course.
Right? But the reason we get to 21 million is because today we're only doing 6.25. And so today we check today's block and say it can only have 6.25 Bitcoin in it and not more.
That
and
block
if you
is
try,
like the 10-minute
yes,
mark. Okay.
It's a bucket of transaction for 10 minutes, the 10-minute mark. So if today everybody agrees that a block can only have 6.25, if anyone tries to make a block that has more, I mean, you can change your software and you can say, no, I'm going to rewrite my software of Bitcoin. I'm going to say mine is going to have 7 Bitcoin. Okay, great. So you make a block with 7 Bitcoin and then you show that to everybody around you. You're like, this is a block of Bitcoin. And they look at it and goes, this is 7 Bitcoin. But if I look at my rules here, it says January 2020, 6.25. This is 7. It should be 6.25. This isn't Bitcoin. And they throw it away. So, so you created something, but that something isn't Bitcoin.
Okay.
Because you changed the rules. And everybody's looking at the same rules. So Bitcoin is the rules. And those rules were set back in 2009. Some small parts of the rules may change from time to time, but I can guarantee you one part of the rules that doesn't change is how much Bitcoin there should be every 10 minutes. And so if we follow that today over the next 10 minutes and we only make 6.25 Bitcoin, by definition, we're keeping the amount limited. All I need to know is that tomorrow I'm going to follow those rules. I know my software is only going to accept blocks that have 6.25 Bitcoin in them, and that's what makes it Bitcoin. So I'm checking the rules. You're checking the rules. You decide that Bitcoin only has less than 21 million coins because you only use the system that follows those rules. And people can change them. But if they change them, all they've done is they've created another system that doesn't follow those rules. And because that system that doesn't follow those rules isn't useful to anybody else, nobody cares, right?
Basically, because so if like somebody else were to create another system, they would be basically creating like a cryptocurrency in and of themselves.
Yes, it's called a fork.
The fork.
It's called a fork. It's where you take the Bitcoin history and you split it and you say, we'll continue going this way with 6.25 Bitcoin. And then there's this guy with 7 Bitcoin. And we could call that one, you know, Fedja coin, and it's inflation based.
Yes.
And if you can persuade some of your friends to be interested in Fedja coin, great, you've created another coin. It's just not Bitcoin. And the reason it's not Bitcoin is because it's not following the same rules. So when you decide to follow those rules by running this software, you're choosing which Bitcoin you're following. And that Bitcoin, I can guarantee you, because you chose it, has less than 21 million coins. And that's at the end, 2140, the year 2140. So it's a good 120 years from now that the last tiny amount of Bitcoin is created. Every 4 years, it divides by 2, it divides by 2, it divides by 2. But because Bitcoin is divisible to 8 decimal places, you keep having these tiny, tiny, tiny amounts coming out. And then it stops.
And what will happen in 2140?
Nothing, because the processing is based on the new Bitcoin as well as transaction fees. And it's just over time, the transaction fees, the fees you pay to create a transaction, are just more important than the new Bitcoin. And so gradually the focus switches towards transaction fees. Right now, you know, about 1/3 of the value of each block is transaction fees, and about 2/3 are new Bitcoin. And as you can imagine, as the new Bitcoin gets reduced and more people use it, the transaction fees, there are more transaction fees per block, and it just reaches an equilibrium. Nothing changes. In 2140, nothing changes. You can keep in mind, we've spent, you know, 120 years getting tiny, 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 tiny amounts of Bitcoin. It's not a sudden thing, right? So that's basically the general idea here, that you follow the rules, and by following the rules, you are participating in the system.
Okay, but like that's one part of the equation. From my point of view, it's like, okay, we as in layman's terms, users abide by these rules, and Bitcoins are getting produced, but like, on the other hand, then who actually produces the Bitcoins? I know, and I've actually read, but I wasn't able to comprehend completely. It has a lot to do with it's the miners actually who produce the Bitcoin. Could you like perhaps indulge a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in order to make sure that Bitcoin isn't controlled by anyone, we have to make some basic decisions. The system has to have some functions that take place. These functions involve, among other things, someone has to record the block that contains all of the transactions, right? So we could say, let's nominate Fedja. Fedja records the block. Now we've given too much power to Fedja. Fedja can start cheating, right? So instead, what we do is we have a global competition. And this global competition happens every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, miners, who are just basically companies that are building specialized computers to compete in this competition, they compete for who gets to create the winning block. And if they create the block that has all of its security and all of its rules checked first within that 10-minute period, that's the block that gets recorded, and they get rewarded with the 6.25 Bitcoin. But in order to do that, they have to follow the rules. Now, the way this competition works is rather interesting because no one can really dominate this competition, right? In order to produce a block, you have to do all of the security work. You have to look at every transaction and make sure. This transaction from Feja to Andreas says Feja is giving Andreas €1 worth of Bitcoin. Great. Does Feja have €1? Is the transaction correct? Is the signature on the transaction correct? Okay, great. So that's one transaction that's correct. And so the miners will check all of the transactions before they put them into a block. And they will construct a block and make sure that all of the rules are correct, including the rule that says 6.25 Bitcoin. And if they do all of that security work to ensure that no one is cheating, then they have a chance to participate in the competition. If they produce a block that breaks the rules in any way, then everybody looks at that block and goes, no, this has 7 Bitcoin. Or no, this has a transaction from Feja, which is incorrect because Feja doesn't have that much money. And so then everybody rejects that block. In order to participate in the competition, the miners have to spend a lot of electricity. And that electricity is their guarantee. The reason they spend that electricity is to guarantee that they're not going to cheat. Because if they cheat and their block is rejected and they don't get the 6.25 Bitcoin, they've still spent the electricity, which means they have an electricity bill that they can't pay because they didn't get the Bitcoin to pay it with, right? So this competition means at the end, the miners don't really make a very large profit unless they're consistently doing things without cheating.
It's a good system. It's a really good system.
Yes, and it also means no one can dominate because every miner has an opportunity to compete, but they're not guaranteed to win. And in order to win blocks, you have to continuously participate in the competition. You have to do all of the security right, and you have to use the electricity. So this competition means that anyone could participate in this mining process, but they have to produce blocks correctly. And so no one is in charge. If a miner tries to cheat, they get punished simply because everybody else rejects their results and they still wasted the electricity. So the system automatically protects against cheating.
It's a really good, it's a really good system. And as you mentioned before, it doesn't rely, it's like a self-sufficient system.
Yes, exactly.
In a way. But as
it's a self-correcting system.
Yeah, self-correcting, exactly. But in terms yet again, going back to the financial institutions and sort of because we're approaching the half-hour mark, is it's a really decentralized system. And it's my question, looking at whether or not it's a near or a far future, won't the governments and the financial financial institutions actually go against this growth of popularity and use of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? Because obviously if they can't monitor it, yet again, as we mentioned, there are going to be no taxes and so on and so forth. And yet again, looking at it really from a legal side, how are they supposed to monitor for terrorist activities and so on and so forth? Basically, my question is, won't the governments, the governmental institutions go against cryptocurrencies? And yet again, how are they supposed to go against it? Because it's so decentralized that they cannot pointed to one specific person or one specific thing.
Well, that's exactly the point. So governments and banks will tell you that if you just give them all the money and they control all the money, there will be no terrorism or crime. How's that working, Fedja? Are they doing really a good job?
Not really.
Because what we're actually discovering is that terrorists are financed by Deutsche Bank and HSBC and Barclays. The banks are doing all of those things, and they don't get punished because with their money, they control the politicians. And the politicians are doing all of these things, and they don't get punished either.
Yes.
So this is a lie. It's a lie that has severe consequences. It's a lie that ensures that billions of people around the world are outside the financial system, do not have access, and a very, very small number of people not only have great access to the financial system, whether they are criminals or not, but they also get to make money for free while breaking the rules. So in the modern world, to own a banking license is to own a license to be a criminal, and to do so with the full protection of the law. Who do you think does money laundering?
Of course. Yeah, of course. The people,
and we know it because you can read about it. This is not some crazy conspiracy theory. They get caught every year. And they're like, you money laundered $1 billion and you made $500 million. Oh, we're going to punish you so hard. There. That's it. Bad boy. $10 million. Fine. Yes. Wait, hang on a second. I made $1 billion in profits and my fine was $10 million. I could make a business out of this.
Of course.
This could be a really good business. And so this is the truth. Now, here's the thing. If you give 7.5 billion people around the planet the ability to use money freely, to send and receive money freely, to participate in a global economy, all we're doing is doing what has existed for thousands of years. For thousands of years, people could exchange value in the form of gold and silver and coins all around the world with no surveillance, with no control, with no monitoring. And that has now become problematic. For thousands of years, we were able to do that. If you give people the ability to use money, people use money to build the future of their children, to send them to school, to give them health care, to give them clean water. That's what people do. The vast majority of people are only interested in doing that. And so the real question is, what is the price we pay for giving complete control of money to a very small number of companies and governments, and then accepting the lie that with that they will protect us? The answer is they become enormously powerful. It creates enormous inequality. And in the end, by condemning billions of people to poverty, it actually creates terrorism and crime. The warlords get financed perfectly fine. You know, that's never been a problem. So the answer to these questions is really simple. If you want to prevent dictators from getting access to cryptocurrency, what you do is you give the people cryptocurrency so they can use it against the dictators. If you want to prevent narcos and terrorists from getting access to cryptocurrency, you give the people cryptocurrency so they can be free of narcos and terrorists, right? And you solve the actual problem. And the actual problem is poverty. The actual problem is desperation. Because that's what causes these social problems. You don't solve it by giving rich people more money and making them control the money. Now, of course, that's my theory. That's my political perspective. My political perspective is that it is a human right to be able to use money to protect your family's future, and that saying that entire countries cannot be part of the financial system is in itself a crime. Now, there's going to be a lot of disagreement. And governments and banks are going to fight us on this. And they're going to fight us because they do not want to separate the money and state. You know, just 150, 200 years ago, they didn't want to separate the church and state either. And it was just as toxic when those two were combined. And so that's a fight that's worth having. It's a fight that's worth having because it means liberating billions of people from control. And I think it's a fight that's winnable. Governments are going to be, no, you can't do that. No, it will be the end of the world unless we control everything. If we don't control everything, yes, crime will happen. When you create political systems where the only way to protect against crime is to give control of everything, guess which position the criminal want? They want that job.
Yeah,
they want the control everything job. And that job becomes very appealing to criminals. So what you end up with is criminals rising to positions of power. So instead, what we're proposing here, what this technology is about, is taking power and spreading it out very, very wide so that there is a lot less power, but it's available to everyone. And that makes it so that people can't control each other. But it also means that they can't actually stop this. And the reason they can't stop this is because all of us now have a little computer that we carry with us. And this little computer can automatically have the power of a Swiss bank in your pocket, and you are the banker. Now, when you take 7.5 billion people and you say you now have the power of a banker, things change. Just like this conversation we're having right now. You have the power of a TV station. You didn't get that because someone gave you a license. You got that because technology allowed you to become a TV broadcaster, and the generation before you to become a newspaper. You are the producer, director, general manager, executive owner of your TV station, and no one can stop you. What Bitcoin does is it makes everyone on the planet a banker and gives everyone the power of being a banker. And that's going to terrify a lot of people until you realize that what most people on the planet will do when given the power of banking is they're going to secure a better future from themselves and their children. Simple as that.
It's a really magnificent like comparison in terms of like, okay, so for example, like pardon me, like the TV station, and then moving towards the podcast, you know, you don't have to be somebody who owns a TV station in order to transmit the information, have interesting conversations such as ours, and, you know, present other forms, either of entertainment, education, and so on and so forth. You can do it independently because of technology. And in those terms, at least like in terms of the things that promote knowledge and information sharing, which is worth sharing, which is almost always the case, is like there's educational power in it. Whereas on the other side, if we're looking at cryptocurrencies through the same lens, it's a power of, I wouldn't say independence, but less dependence on the government, less dependence on, actually not less dependence, but as you pointed out, yes, freedom, more equality, among other things.
Right. And, and this scares people, right? People are scared of this idea of freedom. And it's not just about money that people are scared about this idea of freedom. People were equally scared in the beginning of the internet. I was on the internet in 1989. And people were very scared at the time that if everybody could be a journalist, how do we make sure they're telling the truth?
Yeah, legitimate worry.
And if everybody can be a TV station and everybody can be a newspaper, how do we make sure they tell the truth? And what if terrorists have TV stations? And of course, yes, that happened too. But they could anyway, right? Because sometimes the terrorist is the elected president of your country during a civil war. Right? And they already have a TV station. the bottom line is that at the end, what happened? Most people went out and used the technology of the internet to make videos of their cats and videos of their Christmas tree and communicate with grandma and good things. Good things times billions of people. The same thing happens with money. Money doesn't have within it an evil seed that is separate from humanity. If you give a good person money, they use it to do good things. And if you give a bad person money, they use it to do bad things. You can take a hammer and you can use it to build a house for your neighbor, or you can take that same hammer and use it to smash your neighbor over the head. The hammer doesn't have good or evil in it. Money is just a tool. It is a technology. It's one of the most ancient technologies humanity has had. And the idea that you have to control access to money is as ridiculous as the idea that you have to control access to hammers. If you create a world where in order to get a hammer, you have to register, well,
Yes.
people are going to build fewer houses, and then they're going to be homeless and cold and starving. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to steal a hammer and they're going to use it to rob someone. But the reason they got there is because you left them cold and starving and homeless. If you just given them a hammer, they would have built a house. The same thing applies with any technology. Every technology has a good and a bad side. And my political philosophy, my human philosophy, comes from the fact that I'm a humanist. I believe that fundamentally, the vast, vast majority, 99.99% of people are good. And all they want to do is enjoy life, be productive, and spend good time with their family, do something better for the next generation. All we need to do is give them the tools to do so. And this is a very powerful tool. It's a tool of mathematics. It's a tool of knowledge. And money is a tool of human expression. When you give the ability for humans to express value, to communicate value to each other through the language of money, they use it to build social connections. They use it to improve the lives of themselves and the lives of the other people around them. It's only when you concentrate that access to money into the hands of only very few people that monsters come out of that equation. Because when you concentrate power, and money can be a form of power, when you concentrate that, the monsters are going for that concentration. It attracts them. And they will use it to rule over everyone around them, as we've seen again and again and again.
Yeah, it's because of that it's because of that concentration, and it's because the monsters in and of themselves are going for it, that the people who aren't monsters, those 99.99999%, are willing to do bad things because they need to provide shelter for their children, for themselves, because it's one of those like cliche things to say, doing bad things in order to provide for. It's not a cliche. I had some other thought, but it was like to do bad things in order to provide for survival, not for something else, not in order to decimate anybody in any way, but just in terms to survive. And you really, this is just like a side note, like you're really, and this is of course something that stems from, I don't know how many, like 3 decades of research and studying and being in the world of cryptocurrency, who knows how much in the technical world and technology in and of itself. You're so elegant in providing simple metaphors that are really easy to understand for us, like not basically, but newbies. And one day I hope to have that same sort of a skill and eloquence as you do right now.
Thank you, Feja, so much. I think it's just a bit more gray hair in my head and a bit more time thinking about these issues. But I'll tell you another thing, which I found again and again. One of the reasons that I think I've been able to talk about these things, and one of the reasons many in the United States or in Western Europe have a very difficult time understanding why you can't trust government to solve everything, and why I do understand that, is because I grew up in Greece. If you grow up in Greece or in Bosnia or in Argentina, in Venezuela, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in 150 out of the 194 countries, if someone says, it's okay, all you have to do is trust the government, your reaction is, what? Those guys? No way. I'm not trusting those guys. Have you seen our government? If they're just trying to steal from us, that's a good government. Because sometimes they also try to kill us all.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to explain that to an American. It's very difficult to explain that to a German, at least in this generation.
Yes.
Right? But it's very easy to explain it to all of Germany's neighbors. And so the problem is that if you go to the vast majority of the world and you say, trust the banks, trust the governments, they're like, no. And it's much easier to explain why you need Bitcoin when you don't have a currency that works, when it's impossible to work for a company in another country and get paid, where it's impossible to order something and have it delivered, seeds for your farm, from the next country over, because it involves 3 weeks of fighting with the bank in order to send some money to another country. And that's a very difficult thing to understand, unless you come from one of these countries, in which case it's obvious. I think that's important, and it's one of the reasons I feel strongly about this technology, but also why I immediately saw the value of having something as simple as the internet for the technology of money.
We have a our land, metaphorically speaking, is much more fertile for understanding and utility of cryptocurrency, and not just fertile, but also has much more of a necessity and urgency to it. In order for us to conclude the conversation, because we're already 15 minutes past our half-hour mark, I would just like to ask, both from like my personal hunger for knowledge, but also for those who want to learn more about the cryptocurrencies, both in terms of the technology behind them, but also in terms of how can they actually be used. How would you actually, and which sources would you actually recommend to go about educating oneself about the cryptocurrency and its utility?
Well, I mean, given that I'm actually an educator in the space, I would recommend taking a look at my work, and that's available for free. It's available for free in a variety of languages, subtitled on YouTube. You can find, I have more than 600 videos that explain what Bitcoin is, why it matters, how it works. And of those, more than 300 are in the form of 5 to 10 minute Q&A, questions and answers. So where I answer a specific question. Questions like the ones you asked me today, which I've answered many times in different ways in different audiences. So you can find that on YouTube. If you search Andreas Bitcoin or my username, Antonop, and if you could put a link in the description, that would be fantastic. Yeah, I hope people learn something from that. I've also written a number of books. I've written 5 books so far on the subject. 2 of them are technical books for computer science level, university level understanding of what Bitcoin is and other technologies like it. The other books are non-technical. They're a collection of my talks and seminars called The Internet of Money. The Internet of Money, Volume 1, 2, and 3, which you can buy at bookstores or on my shop. And those are books for non-technical audiences, and they're about why Bitcoin matters. What is the social, political, economic, philosophical, historical implications of this technology on humanity?
Okay, I'll be sure to put down all of the links, including your YouTube channel, of course, and website. And also, I believe this will be really beneficial, your collection of talks, as you mentioned, like in the book, The Internet of Money, in its free volumes, so that anybody who really has an interest in this to go into it, educate yourselves and really look forward, because it's the future. And like, as we all too often in the Balkans look into the past and dwell on the present, it's about time to educate ourselves further and look forward to the future. And Andreas, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you have a lovely weekend, that we'll speak sometime soon in the future again.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you very much.